we're so lucky to be together and to have Nomi Green facilitating for us this morning. Nomi is a dear Sangha sister of mine, so it's my joy and pleasure to get to introduce her. A fun fact about Nomi, but I was revisiting your Earth Holder bio this morning, Nomi, and she majored in ecofeminism, which I think is awesome. She's a psychotherapist who specializes in trauma, and today she's going to be sharing some practices for metabolizing grief and trauma for Earth Holders. So we're so lucky to have her doing those practices with us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nomi. Thank you.
Good morning, dear community. First, I want to acknowledge that where I sit right now is on unceded Tewa land. Tewa people are the original people of where I am. And I know many of you are aware of the original people of wherever you are on this planet. And that perhaps we can just all sit with that. The fact that it's unceded land literally means it was stolen. Our practice is not to take anything that isn't given freely. So that's a koan that we could practice with for the rest of our lives. So let's just take a breath or two with that. And I'd like to just mention a couple things that are going to happen today that might be a little different. I have these two different trauma-informed meditations. One we'll do at the beginning and one we'll do at the end. And I know sometimes people don't stay for the end. And so I just want to encourage, if you can, to stay for that. I've gone back and forth which one to do first and which one to do last. So I think they're both worth our time. And and the other thing that's going to happen today when we break into Dharma sharing groups, I want to say this up front because some people don't stay for Dharma sharing, is that we're going to experiment with having a people of color Dharma sharing group, which technically might be a little bit complicated for us. So it'll take us a minute or two to figure out how to do it. So your patience when we get to that in putting people into rooms. We're happy about that as well. So I guess I'm going to go with this one first and hope you hang in there for the one at the end. So first, let me say not all mindfulness is trauma sensitive, and that we want to practice with what works for our own bodies, and that we're actually the only one who knows what works inside our individual sack of skin. We are in the ultimate and we are also in the historical, and in the historical we live in these bodies. And today what we're going to do hopefully is going to be trauma informed and trauma sensitive. It's something I just want to say for any time you are in meditation or any kind of mindfulness practice, to really check in with yourself in what I call with your wise mind, your own wisdom that's inside your physical being. So I encourage each of us to do that today and all the time. So that said, let's see what we're going to do. I'm going to guide us today, and I may use a few more words than I typically would, but it's to point out the trauma pieces of it, trauma sensitive pieces. This is not just for trauma, it's for grief, anxiety, all of the things that come up for us in the wild changes that are happening on our planet every day. So with that, I'd like everyone to feel your seat. So notice where your bottom is making contact with the chair or cushion or whatever it is that you're on. Notice how gravity is actually doing all the work. You don't have to do anything to stay right here. You can relax into sitting. Notice your feet. The same thing, where they're making contact with the earth. Maybe intentionally put a little bit of awareness into the heaviness of your seat and your feet. Notice how relaxing it can be to just let them be. Let them relax with gravity that holds us all on this precious planet. Notice your hands, just wherever they are. No need to move them. Perhaps there's a little heat coming from them. My hands right now are on my thighs, and I can feel a little warmth between the bottoms of my hands and my thighs. And if you're having that experience, to just notice that warmth. It might be a very pleasant experience to just notice that. Now notice your breath. No need to change it in any way. Just notice it's coming in, it's going out. Sometimes the awareness of these 4 things I've just pointed out is enough to calm our nervous system. I'm going to go through them again, and then we're going to add another element. Notice your seat. Notice your feet. Notice your hands. Notice your breath. And now, in noticing your breath, we're going to maybe change our breath just slightly. This goes so well with our meditation practice. We're going to just count how many beats, how many seconds of our in-breath. So maybe your in-breath is the count of 2 or 3. Whatever it is, we're going to intentionally lengthen the out breath just a little bit. So if your in-breath is 3 counts, to have your out-breath be 5 counts or longer. But the intention is to make the out-breath just a little bit longer than the in-breath. Later, I'll explain some of the neuroscience behind that. Let's just sit for a couple of minutes. Ding. I just realized I did not bring my bell out, so I am my bell. Ding. So I'm hoping this morning that we're going to weave some neuroscience, ways of metabolizing our grief, and a little trauma resiliency. These are things that we could use in our sanghas or in the world as we go out in the world as earth holders. There are more than enough opportunities for us to be activated when we read the news, when we personally see something that has changed or experiencing it, whether it's rain or drought or a tree that we love that's dying. These things are happening every day. We're experiencing them all the time. And so how do we keep our feet on the middle path in the midst of all the changes that are happening? So as I said before we started, not all mindfulness is trauma sensitive. We tend to think mindfulness is good for everybody, but sometimes if we hold it too tightly and we have either we're activated in that moment or we actually have some trauma history, whether that's historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, or individual trauma, sometimes attempting to stay with it can make things worse. So some examples are that for some people, the breath can be activating. And for someone like that, it might be best to do practices that keep us in our body. And for some people, being in our body is activating. So we may look for ways to be with our breath, or we might even have meditations where the object of our meditation is outside of us. So like in the Zen practice where you pick a spot on a wall and focus on that. It's something outside of our body, if being in our bodies is too activating. We also want to be gentle with ourselves about how much time do we spend in meditation or not, based on coming back again to that concept I'm calling wise mind. See my friend Neil here, who is familiar with some of the concepts I'm using. So there are examples of meditation or meditation retreats that actually could make things worse for people. And I just want to highlight that in case any of you have had those experiences. Sometimes silence, being in a silent retreat, can be like a pressure cooker that really builds up a lot of pressure when there is grief, anxiety, trauma. I want to say, when I'm speaking of trauma today, I'm mostly talking about small t trauma, the kind of trauma we all experience. And I'm also, the practices I'm offering today are for small t trauma, not to be confused with large T trauma, which might be PTSD. It might not, but trauma that is significant, you might need more guidance, and a meditation practice or a mindfulness practice or being part of a beautiful community such as ours might not be enough. You might need a guide like a therapist for large T trauma. So what I'm offering today, I don't want it to be misconstrued as sufficient for addressing those. Some other examples of, another example of how trauma could be exacerbated is, in particular, I've known people who have had the historical experience of being invisible, who then have gone to retreats where no eye contact is made, and that actually can cause more harm. So there are many reasons why that might not work for people who either live in a world that invisibilizes us or them, and or who have had historical trauma of their culture being invisibilized, ignored, not seen. So those are some things to think about. Hold on, my notes keep shutting down. So again, I want to come back to learning how to trust our own inner experience, because that really is the only guide we have for whether something's working for us or not working for us. And my guess is perhaps all of you have had an experience where somebody has instructed you to do something and it didn't work, and it actually led to more activation. So continuing to come back to our own internal wisdom is key. So I want to show you a couple pictures. I was going to try and do these in the sharing screen, but it seems easier to do it this way. So let's see. Can you see that? Just let me know if that's not clear, if it's, because I can't see you right now. So this is what we would call the window of tolerance. The red lines are the edges of our window. Each of us has a window that's larger or smaller. And when we're in flow with that window, our breath, our body is kind of in this nice rhythm. Up. So when we're in that window, we're regulated. Things are going okay. And I can make copies of these and send them afterwards if it's hard to read. what happens when we're not in the window is, for some of us, so that little lightning is like a traumatic event. Could be we just walking down the street and we notice that tree we love is not doing well. Could be small t like that, but nonetheless, it can send us out of that window. So we can go on high, which can lead us, my hands shake, so maybe this wasn't the best plan. If we get above the window, it can lead us to anger, anxiety, other kinds of, like, our heart is beating faster, our breath is breathing faster. If we go below the window, it can lead to depression, numbness, dissociation, and things that make us feel like we're shutting down. So either way, we're outside of this window. And what these practices do is help us get back into the window, stay in the window a little longer, and actually grow our window. Some of us have narrow windows, and some of us have bigger windows. So we want to see, can I grow my window? Can I keep my autonomic nervous system in balance in the midst of seeing this beloved tree not doing well? And so some of the practices that we did in the meditation, where we lengthen our out breath, which is something we can do anywhere we are, or where we just feel gravity holding us here. Those are things that even on the fly can help us to do that. Oh, my window has shut down again. Hold on. So the other concept, and this window of tolerance is something that's been studied in neuroscience. Another concept I want us to be familiar with when we're thinking about this is the concept of epigenetics. So epigenetics is the science of how our genes turn on or turn the volume up, or how our genes turn off or turn the volume down. Our genes themselves don't change. What we say is that how they express themselves changes. And in trauma, the expression of our genes changes. So I want to give a couple of historical examples for communities. I'm Jewish, and there's been a lot of study about Holocaust survivors and how epigenetics have changed a Holocaust survivor's expression of their genes, and how this is the really fascinating part, how the child of a Holocaust survivor is born with this expression turned on. So we think trauma is only one generation long, but it isn't, because the way our genes express can make that trauma be turned on at birth, before birth, in utero, which is a really fascinating concept. With the research that's been done on Jewish people, and these are very broad generalities, so don't make them like hard facts, but the research that's been done with Jewish people says that Jewish people have, after about a generation and a half, the expression of it living in someplace safe, the expression of the genes turns back off, so that this doesn't last forever. Having safety, it's been interesting that deep listening is one of the things that helps return a gene back to its natural state. So there are different things that can help to turn the expression of genes off. What's been found with Black Americans, however, is that the epigenetic genes have never turned off, because the trauma continues it has never, there's never been enough safety that a generation of people, so this is not individuals, there may be individuals that this is different for, but this is what the research shows on a community, on a group of people who live in the same experiences. So for 400 years, the trauma gene has been turned on for Black Americans. So this is all really interesting. We're not going to today turn the expression of those genes down or turn them off, but it's something important for us to keep in mind about why some communities may have different kinds of responses to things or need different kinds of conditions. So what helps? Let's get to what helps us. So with our grief, we need to be metabolizing our grief every day. We encounter conditions that cause us to grieve about the rapid changes in our world every day. So how do we, on a daily basis, metabolize our grief? So the things we did in the meditation, those are some things one can do. The Earth Holders have some things we've created. We've created a beginning anew for Earth Holders, which that process of being with, offering our apology for what we've done actually can be very helpful. The Earth Holders we've also written 4 touchings of the earth for Earth Holders. So touching the earth, getting down on our hands and knees and putting our head on the ground and being in that child pose is a way to metabolize our grief. I like this one a lot. We're gonna get to experiment with it. Not right now, but at some point in a little bit, but I'm gonna tell you about it now. So Peter Levine, who's a trauma therapist and researcher, watched animals in the wild. And after a traumatic event, like you could look up these YouTubes of a lion chasing a gazelle and the gazelle gets away. And as soon as the gazelle gets away and the lion is gone and the gazelle knows that they are physically safe, the first thing the gazelle does is get up and shake. Starts shaking its legs, starts shaking, and that shake goes through its whole body. Some of you who have dogs have seen your dog do that. The shake just goes through the whole body, and what that does is it metabolizes the trauma. Part of why trauma becomes problematic is because there's a situation and our body activates to handle the situation, but cannot. So in that situation, the gazelle lays down to play dead, perhaps. So what the gazelle wants to do is run, but it lays down to play dead so that the lion doesn't think it's live prey. And then the trauma gets stuck. But when it gets up and shakes, it shakes all of that out of it. And while we're moving into Dharma sharing groups, we're going to get to practice with that because it's going to take Stephanie a few minutes to get us settled. So we'll have an opportunity to practice with that. I know a nun in our tradition, a Plum Village nun, who tells me that when she can't sleep at night, what she does is, it's a combination of a couple of these. She gets out of bed, she shakes everywhere, and then she touches the earth. And then she lays back down and is able to fall asleep. So, so for those of you who have difficulty sleeping, I want to say that ceremony is a very important part of metabolizing grief and large-scale traumas. When Thai went to Vietnam, he held grand requiems for all the beings that had been killed, the Vietnamese and the American soldiers. They went to the killing fields and held these ceremonies. I don't know if any of you here had the opportunity to be part of that, but I know my own experiences when I sit through a ceremony, 5 mindfulness, 14 mindfulness trainings, a touching of the earth ceremony, or some of the other ceremonies we do, I just kind of feel washed clean afterwards, is kind of how it feels. It's like I've been cleansed. And Louise, my friend Louise, who's going to facilitate in a couple of months and who is here with us today, she and I had the opportunity to go to a ceremony about a month ago that was initiated by a Lakota elder. And it was an apology ceremony of apology and forgiveness. And I really had that experience there. Louise is probably going to share a lot more with us about this when she facilitates in a couple of months, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but it was a deeply moving experience of feeling that kind of cleansed all the way, deeply cleansed. And so that's one of the things we earth holders, and I actually hope to be working on this, so any of you who are interested, send me an email. We earth holders are looking at how do we make more ceremony in our tradition? How do we create more opportunities for that kind of healing and cleansing that we can do as a community together? So another way we heal is actually to become active. So this is, again, we're so fortunate to have our magnificent teacher who encourages us to not just sit on a cushion, but to get out in the world. And I am assuming that those of you who are Earth Holder Sangha members are people who that's an important part of our practice. I want to tell a story about actively, maybe 2 stories, we'll see how much time I have, about actively repairing the world. Thai tells a story, I don't know if any of you have heard this story, probably a number of you have, about many years ago when our community was having retreats with Vietnam veterans and the monastic and Vietnamese community were having retreats together as a way of healing from the traumas in that war. Thai tells a story. The story's a little hard to hear, but it points us in an important direction, I think. He tells a story of a Vietnam vet who, in question and answer, said that he had done something during the Vietnam War, what we call the Vietnam War, what the Vietnamese call the American War. He had done something during that war where he had made sandwiches with gunpowder in them. He had put these sandwiches on a wall, and then he watched these Vietnamese children come and eat the sandwiches. And he watched them become very sick, and they died. And this vet said he could not be in a room with children, that he could not be around children. He had done something so harmful, he could not be around children. And here's what Thai said to him. He said, those children are dead, but there are millions of children who are alive today who could use your help. And the way that you can heal from this is to find a way to be with children, to find a way to offer something to children. And that's what this Vietnam vet did. So I say that, I mean, it's a very hard story to hear. I say it because that's kind of the place we're in, isn't it? Where there is so much dying around us. There's so much that's off track that we see, that we wish was different, and we're not going to be able to fix all of it. But we can do something. And not only will that something help whatever plants or animals or minerals or people that we help, but it will also help us heal. It's part of our healing, is to see that we can make a difference, maybe with just one plant, maybe with just one tree. I keep using as this example, this beloved tree that's dying. You know, maybe we take buckets of water to that tree. It may be a very small impact, but that actually helps us to metabolize our grief. So let's see, I only have a minute or two if we're going to be on track. Let's see what I haven't mentioned. So when we go into Dharma sharing, you can think of this as a grief and trauma practice as you deeply listen to your companions, because that deep listening is also a part of what helps us heal. Let's see. Well, I'm going to tell one more story and then we're going to divide into Dharma sharing. Another thing that I was involved with this summer, and actually I want to say a little about what my apology was at the apology ceremony. I apologized for assimilation. So my family, who had survived from pogroms, landed in Cleveland, Ohio. And because of our white skin, we just slipped right in and benefited from white skin privilege. So there I was growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, where the Cuyahoga River burned 13 times. I learned about the Cuyahoga River burning, but what I didn't learn was Cuyahoga is an Anishinaabe word for crooked river. I swam in Lake Erie with dead fish because that's what Lake Erie was at that time. And I learned about the dead fish, but what I didn't learn was that the Erie people were a great people who had lived in that area. And I don't think it's coincidental that what I'm talking about is environmental degradation juxtaposed with indigenous named places. I think that's actually part of what's gone wrong, is that rather than learning the indigenous people and what they offered and what their lives were like, we learn about environmental degradation. I don't think that's a coincidence that those things are juxtaposed. So I wish I had more time. I have more stories, but we're not going to get to them today. I've already gone over. If you are brave enough to just get up and shake your whole body, put your hands up in the air, let it go all the way through your body, shake your feet out, shake your whole body, and then sit back down and notice what happens. So thank you, dear friends, for listening, and I hope many of you will stay for the meditation on the other side.
Dear friends, for being here. Thank you, Nomi, for your beautiful facilitation, and we'll hope to be together again next month. Bye, everyone.